Imagine walking into a clinic, right? And you're offered a facelift, but not for your face.
Right, yeah.
Today, I mean, you can open up Instagram or TikTok, and within minutes, you just find all these influencers pushing, cinnamon-laced gels,
Yeah.
sleek little devices, and totally unregulated laser
Well,
treatments.
absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. And they're all promising to, quote, rejuvenate or tighten women's bodies to this standard of perfection that literally does not exist in human biology. So welcome to today's deep dive. We were so glad you're here.
Yeah, and what's wild to me is just how seamlessly it's integrated into everyday life for you. Like these heavily marketed treatments are just placed right alongside, your daily moisturizer or your vitamin C
Yeah.
serum.
Right next to the face wash.
Exactly, which completely normalizes this really toxic idea that every single millimeter of your anatomy is somehow flawed, and that it requires some sort of pricey upgrade.
And that marketing is, I mean, it's incredibly convincing. It creates this overwhelming pressure that something is just fundamentally wrong with you if you don't fit this perfectly airbrushed mold.
It really does.
But when you actually compare what these products and these procedures are doing against, well, just basic human physiology, the reality is a completely different story.
A very different story.
So today, we're taking you on a journey to just cut through all of that marketing noise, all the social media pressure. We are going to answer one very specific, very pressing question. Are virginity tightening and vaginal rejuvenation claims actually medically valid?
And to get to the bottom of that for you, we are pulling from a really wide array of data today.
We've got quite the stack of sources.
We do. Instead of just looking at what the cosmetic industry is claiming in their ads, we're diving straight into international medical guidelines. So we're looking at the World Health Organization, safety warnings from the FDA, and clinical insights from providers like the Women's Health Clinic.
And we're looking at the law, too.
Yes, exactly. We're even digging into recent legal frameworks, specifically the UK's Health and Care Act 2022, just to see how governments are actually starting to respond to these practices. Because for you, the listener, this deep dive is really about gaining essential body literacy.
Right, recognizing how these societal pressures disguise themselves as medical necessities. So let's just start with the most accessible things out there, the products you could literally just add to your digital shopping cart right now on your phone.
The over-the-counter stuff.
Exactly. Over-the-counter vaginal tightening creams and gels. They are heavily marketed as these natural, gentle, botanical solutions to vaginal looseness. You read the back of the tube, and I mean, the ingredients sound like you're baking a cake.
Right, like a spice rack.
Seriously, it's like
Well,
ginger, cinnamon, cocoa extracts.
Huh.
But okay, let's unpack this. You're telling me these wellness creams are essentially doing the exact same thing as leaving a wet sponge out in the hot sun? Like, that cannot be legal to market as a health product.
Well, the crazy part is it is entirely legal. And that's primarily because they are marketed as cosmetics, not as heavily regulated pharmaceuticals.
Oh, wow. So they bypass all that testing.
Yeah, they totally bypass the strict medical scrutiny. And, your wet sponge comparison is actually structurally accurate when you look at the actual mechanism of action. These creams do absolutely nothing to rebuild muscle or alter the structural integrity of the vaginal wall. Nothing at all.
So what are they doing? Just tightening the skin temporarily?
They rely on super high concentrations of astringents.
Okay, wait. So if I use an astringent toner on my face, it feels really tight and dry because it's stripping away all the oils, right? Is that exactly what's happening internally?
Yes, but with much, much more severe consequences. So botanical astringents contain these compounds called tannins.
Like in red wine.
Exactly like in red wine, that dry mouth feeling you get. When you apply tannins to a delicate mucous membrane, they essentially precipitate proteins and aggressively extract water from the surrounding tissue. You are chemically dehydrating the vaginal mucosa.
You're drying out a tissue environment that is literally designed by human evolution to be moist.
Exactly. And that temporary extreme dehydration causes the tissue to shrink and pucker up. So for a brief window of maybe, I don't know, a few hours, the user experiences a simulated feeling of tightness,
An illusion, basically.
a total chemical illusion. But you have to look at what you are destroying to get that temporary effect. The female genital tract relies on an incredibly delicate, highly calibrated ecosystem.
Like the microbiome.
Right, the microbiome. You have these colonies of good bacteria, specifically lactobacilli, which produce lactic acid. And that lactic acid keeps the vaginal pH slightly acidic, which is the body's primary natural defense against harmful pathogens.
And I'm guessing pumping high concentrations of cinnamon and ginger extract into that ecosystem is essentially like dropping a bomb on those good bacteria.
No, it obliterates them. You completely disrupt the pH, which leaves the entire environment wide open for aggressive bacterial infections or really stubborn yeast infections.
That sounds miserable.
It is. But the physical damage is arguably even worse. Because you've chemically induced this severe artificial vaginal dryness, any intimacy or penetration is going to involve immense friction.
Which leads to micro tears in the tissue.
Significant micro tears. And because you've already stripped away that protective acidic pH we just talked about, those tears become highly susceptible to chronic inflammation.
So they get infected easily.
Very easily. So a product that's marketed to, quote, boost your confidence in the bedroom is actively setting you up for chronic pelvic pain and a vicious cycle of medical intervention.
That is just so wild to me. So if someone is genuinely dealing with a feeling of laxity, say, after significant childbirth trauma or during menopause when estrogen levels naturally drop, and these topical creams are just a dangerous chemical illusion, what actually works biologically?
Well, real structural change requires actually conditioning the pelvic floor muscles.
So like going to the gym, but for your pelvis.
Exactly. The medical consensus points directly to targeted physical therapy. We're talking about consistent Kegel exercises, often utilizing progressive biofeedback weights.
Oh, so actual weights.
Yes, small weights used internally under the guidance of a trained pelvic floor physiotherapist to actually rebuild that muscle tone and properly support the pelvic organs. It takes time, it takes effort, and sweat. It is not a quick topical cosmetic.
Okay, so if the creams are a total chemical illusion and physical therapy actually takes time and effort, it makes perfect sense that patients are kind of desperate for a high-tech, immediate fix.
Yeah, people want a shortcut.
Right. And that brings us to the explosion of lasers and radiofrequency devices. But the data here gets incredibly messy. I was reading the FDA warnings in our source stack, and former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb issued this remarkably stern statement.
He really didn't hold back.
No, he didn't. He essentially warned that energy-based vaginal rejuvenation totally lacks adequate clinical evidence. And he specifically cited horrifying risks, like severe burns and permanent scarring.
Yeah, the FDA really had to step in because they were seeing an absolute flood of procedures being aggressively marketed for sexual dysfunction and vaginal laxity, but they had zero controlled clinical data to back up those specific cosmetic claims.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly where the sources seemingly contradict each other.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the FDA is issuing these massive, right, because the idea of someone whose primary training is in eyebrow threading, using a high-powered thermal laser internally, is genuinely terrifying.
It is a massive patient safety risk. However, the clinic argues that the FDA's blanket statement was just overly broad. They say it ignored over 35 years of safe, medically necessary CO2 laser use in regular gynecology.
So the tool itself isn't the problem.
Exactly. Their point is that the machine itself isn't the inherent danger. The danger is the lack of medical regulation and the untrained aesthetic professional holding the device.
Let's actually look at the physics of that. How does this laser technology work when it is in the hands of a highly trained gynecologist? Like, what is the laser physically doing to the vaginal tissue?
It's all about a highly controlled microscopic thermal effect. The laser energy is absorbed by the residual water in the vaginal connective tissue. A trained medical professional carefully calibrates the device to keep the heat generated strictly between 45 and 60 degrees Celsius.
Wait, why that specific temperature range? What happens if it's hotter?
Well, if you go hotter, you cause irreversible tissue necrosis, so burns and scarring, just like the FDA warned about.
Yikes.
But if you keep it precisely within that 45 to 60 degree window, you create these microscopic zones of thermal injury. This controlled microdamage tricks the body, basically, and triggers the natural inflammatory cascade, which then signals fibroblasts to rush to the area.
Okay, wait, fibroblasts, those are the cells responsible for the structural framework of the tissues, right?
Exactly.
And they start producing neocollagenesis. I saw that term in the clinics data. So neo meaning new, it's literally tricking your body into building brand new collagen and fresh blood vessels from scratch by forcing the tissue to repair itself.
That's a perfect translation of the mechanism, neocollagenesis and neovascularization. It restores elasticity and moisture to the tissue by leveraging the body's own biological repair mechanisms.
So it does work, medically speaking.
According to the clinical data from specialized providers, this specific, controlled application can effectively treat symptoms of mild stress urinary incontinence and severe menopausal vaginal dryness.
But it is explicitly not a miracle cure for major structural issues.
Not at all. It cannot fix a major pelvic floor prolapse, and it certainly isn't a cosmetic facelift. It is a targeted tool for very specific, mild symptoms when utilized by an absolute expert.
Right. So the takeaway for you listening is that you have to separate the physics of the laser from the ethics of the clinic. The machine isn't necessarily the danger. The danger is the aggressive marketing of a rejuvenation cure-all by, like, unregulated businesses that prioritize profit over your safety.
Exactly.
But here's the really terrifying reality. When those unregulated med spa lasers fail to give patients that airbrush perfection they see on Instagram, the desperation doesn't just go away, does it?
No, it usually escalates.
It moves directly to the operating table. Our sources detail this massive exponential spike in female genital cosmetic surgery, or FGCS.
Yeah, and this is a phenomenon driven almost entirely by the internet. The aesthetic standards for female genitalia are no longer based on biological reality at all.
What are they based on?
They are being dictated by social media, by fitness influencers wearing tight clothing, and really the pervasive accessibility of internet pornography.
We're seeing huge numbers of procedures like labiaplasty, which involved actually surgically cutting away tissue from the labia minora, and vaginoplasty, which surgically tightens the vaginal canal. The marketing pushes this frankly disturbing concept of a designer vagina or a Barbie vulva.
Right.
It implies there is only one correct, neat, almost prepubescent look that every single adult woman should aspire to. But functionally, what does this actually mean for the patient? Are they actually improving their sexual function by amputating this tissue?
The medical consensus is a resounding no. When you look at the strict guidelines from the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, the RACGP, and the dermatological data from DermNet, they state unequivocally that there is zero controlled evidence that these non-medically indicated surgeries improve sexual satisfaction.
None at all.
None. In fact, they frequently destroy it entirely.
Because you aren't just snipping away a little bit of excess skin, right?
Far from it.
Yeah.
And this is where anatomical literacy is just so crucial. The labia minora is not just extra skin that can be trimmed off like a fingernail.
Right.
Embryologically speaking, it is derived from the exact same tissue as the primordial phallus. So it is deeply analogous to the specialized tissue of the penis and clitoris. It is incredibly rich in nerve endings, specialized sebaceous glands, and vascular compartments that literally engorge with blood during arousal.
Oh, wow. So when a surgeon excises that tissue, just for a cosmetic trend, they are permanently amputating functional sensory anatomy.
Yes, they really are. And the risks of doing that are profound. Beyond the standard surgical risks, of infection or the wound breaking open, patients frequently develop a condition called allodynia.
I saw the term allodynia in the DermNet report, and honestly, the clinical description sounded like an absolute nightmare. Is it true that a perfectly normal touch can suddenly feel like agonizing pain?
That is exactly what it is. Allodynia is a severe neuropathic pain condition. So normally, painless stimuli like just the friction of wearing normal underwear or sitting on a bicycle seat become excruciatingly painful because the severed nerves are constantly misfiring.
That's horrifying.
It gets worse. Patients also risk developing dyspareunia, which is chronic debilitating pain during sex.
Yeah.
They face permanent loss of sexual sensation, and they develop severe, rigid scarring.
Because scar tissue doesn't stretch like normal tissue.
Exactly. There are documented cases where the rigid scar tissue from these cosmetic procedures actually pairs aggressively during later childbirth, simply because the tissue can no longer stretch naturally.
I mean, you go into a clinic just trying to match some airbrush photo you scrolled past online, and you end up with lifelong chronic pain.
And this really forces us to look at how modern cosmetic medicine is just warping our psychology. When marketing encourages you to view yourself as a consumer of a product, it fundamentally changes the doctor-patient dynamic.
Yeah, you're not a patient healing, you're a buyer shopping.
Right. It normalizes surgical alteration for fleeting aesthetic trends, but human bodies aren't trends. When the surgical reality, which, by the way, always includes scars, physical trauma, and potential numbness, when that inevitably fails to match the airbrushed expectation, it leads to profound psychological distress and regret.
Which is why we need to hammer this point home for you listening. Normal vulvas come in a massive, beautiful variety of shapes, sizes, asymmetry, and colors. The Barbie vulva is a manufactured ideal designed to sell surgeries. It is not a biological standard.
Absolutely not.
But this pressure to conform to a specific physical ideal doesn't just stop at aesthetics, does it? It goes much, much darker.
It really does. When you trace the line from societal pressure to the desire to exert absolute control over women's bodies, you eventually arrive at the most culturally entrenched extreme of all.
The demand for a woman's body to physically anatomically prove her purity.
Exactly. We are talking about the concepts of virginity testing and hymenoplasty.
Let's ground this in basic biology first, because
Okay.
the amount of misinformation out there is staggering. What actually is the hymen?
So, according to comprehensive data from the World Health Organization and the UK's Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the hymen is simply a thin, highly elastic piece of mucosal membrane that partially covers the entrance to the vagina.
Culturally, we treat the hymen like it's some sort of tamper-evident seal on a medicine bottle. Like if it's broken, someone has definitely been inside.
Right.
But looking at the WHO data, it's actually much more like a flexible scrunchie. It's built to stretch.
That is a perfect biological visualization. It's a scrunchie. During puberty, the natural surge of estrogen in the body makes the hymenal tissue incredibly stretchy and resilient. It is designed to accommodate penetration, often without tearing at all.
And it can be altered without sex.
Oh, totally. It can be altered, stretched, or torn by completely non-sexual activities, things like gymnastics, horseback riding, or simply inserting a tampon.
And despite the incredibly persistent myth, it does not always bleed the first time someone has vaginal intercourse.
Often it doesn't bleed at all. The hymen has relatively few blood vessels to begin with. The World Health Organization is incredibly forceful on this specific point. They state the appearance of a hymen is not a reliable indication of whether a woman has or has not had vaginal intercourse.
Wow.
Let me say that again because it's so important. There is absolutely no known clinical examination that can definitively prove a history of vaginal intercourse.
None. Zero. Yet despite this absolute lack of scientific validity, virginity testing is still a massive, deeply ingrained issue globally.
It is. Virginity testing is typically an invasive two-finger examination, where a practitioner attempts to visually or physically assess the size of the vaginal opening or the state of the hymen to, quote, prove virginity.
Which we just established is biologically impossible.
Exactly. And when a young woman is terrified she will fail this fake test, she might seek out a hymenoplasty.
Okay, and this is where a surgeon stitches the vaginal tissue or the hymenal remnants together so that the woman will forcibly tear and bleed upon her next penetration rite. It's essentially simulating virginity for a wedding night.
Yes. A surgeon is deliberately creating rigid scar tissue for the sole explicit purpose of causing traumatic bleeding later. Neither the test nor the surgery has a shred of medical or scientific validity.
But the societal consequences of these myths are quite literally a matter of life and death. We're looking at heartbreaking reports from charities like Karma Nirvana and IKWRO. They recognize virginity testing and hymenoplasty as direct, undeniable precursors to honor-based abuse.
Yes, because if a woman fails one of these totally unscientific virginity tests, or if she simply doesn't bleed on her wedding night, the consequences in highly conservative cultures are devastating.
It's terrifying.
It can lead to intense emotional abuse, physical violence, forced marriage, complete disownment by the family, and even honor killings. It is a severe human rights violation designed specifically to exert patriarchal control over women's sexual autonomy.
Which is why the UK took a massive, unprecedented step.
Hmm.
Under the Health and Care Act 2022, the UK officially banned both virginity testing and hymenoplasty outright. It is now a criminal offense carrying up to 5 years in prison, regardless of whether it's performed in a sterile medical clinic or some community setting.
And that legislation is such a vital step forward. But, when we look at this issue on a global scale, it places doctors in a fascinating, really agonizing clinical dilemma.
Right, because of the harm reduction model in medicine.
Exactly. So imagine you are a primary care physician in a country where these tests are still socially demanded. A young woman comes into your clinic, terrified, accompanied by family members who are demanding a certificate of virginity.
Okay.
The doctor knows the test is medically fake. They know virginity cannot be physically proven, but they also know that if they look at the family and refuse to write that certificate, that young woman might be severely beaten or killed the moment she goes home.
That is an impossible situation. So what does the doctor do? Do they uphold scientific truth, or do they lie on a medical document to save her life?
It is the ultimate ethical tightrope. Global health guidelines urge clinicians to prioritize immediate patient safety above everything else. They are instructed to conduct a comprehensive, discrete risk assessment for domestic violence and honor-based abuse.
So they have to read the room very carefully.
Very carefully. In a harm reduction model, a clinician might conduct a totally non-invasive external visual exam and write a carefully worded medical certificate that states something like normal external genitalia for age, deliberately omitting the medically meaningless word virgin.
Ah, so they use clinical language to protect the patient without validating the unscientific myth for the family.
Yes, they are urged to use the clinical visit as a rare opportunity for safeguarding. They offer support resources and privately educate the patient rather than performing an invasive, humiliating, and entirely unscientific internal test.
But the fact that doctors have to invent these linguistic workarounds just highlights how deeply ingrained and physically dangerous these cultural myths truly are.
It really does.
So let's pull all of these threads together for you. We started by looking at those botanical astringent creams, which essentially use chemical dehydration to create a temporary illusion of tightness, while actively destroying the vaginal microbiome and leading to micro tears and infections.
Right. And from there, we looked at high-tech energy devices like CO2 lasers. We learned they can offer genuine medical benefits like neocollagenesis for mild incontinence. But they become incredibly dangerous weapons when marketed as a cosmetic cure-all by unregulated med spas.
Then we dug into the grim surgical reality of the Barbie vulva trend, realizing that cutting away vital, nerve-rich tissue derived from the primordial phallus in pursuit of an internet aesthetic often leaves patients with debilitating chronic pain and a total loss of sensation.
And finally, we dismantled the ultimate biological myth, right? The hymen as a physical proof of purity. A myth so powerful and completely unscientific that it drives the abusive practices of virginity testing and hymen repair, serving absolutely no medical purpose other than controlling women's autonomy.
The common thread running through every single one of these topics is crystal clear. The quest to tighten, rejuvenate, or restore the vagina is overwhelmingly driven by predatory marketing, widespread anatomical misinformation, and patriarchal control, rather than any genuine medical necessity.
And your absolute best defense against all of this is exactly what we've been doing today. Knowledge is power. Gaining true body literacy, understanding the actual microscopic anatomy of your body, how it functionally works, and accepting its natural variations and changes through aging and childbirth is how you immunize yourself against predatory marketing and harmful cultural myths.
You don't need to be rejuvenated if you were never broken in the first place. We started this deep dive talking about how incredibly normal it feels to just scroll on your phone and be bombarded with ads promising to fix our intimate biology. But knowing what we know now about the reality of human physiology, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Yeah, what's that?
If medical science has definitively proven that virginity leaves absolutely no physical trace on the human body, how long will it take for our everyday language, our legal systems, and our societal moral frameworks to finally catch up with basic biology?